Ready?
Yeah, little red lights on.
Okay, we're back.
You started.
Okay. Last area that I want to cover is, and I think this goes right along a little bit with succession planning, is the performance appraisal process. Because if you're going to have a career development type discussion with an employee, performance appraisal is at least the one time a year where someone sits down, although they should be sitting down with you, and no performance appraisal should ever be a surprise. If it is, bad management, okay? But I have two questions up here, and I'll ask them. Why do employees hate to get performance appraisals? People get real anxious.
I find that most of the time you don't completely agree with the person that's giving you the appraisal. You just feel like maybe they're not seeing your skills for what they really are.
Yeah. People don't like to get bad news, or they don't, or get news that maybe it isn't reflective of what they think their performance is. Why do you think supervisors hate to give them?
They hate to give bad news.
They hate to give bad news. So here you have a process where supervisors hate to give bad news, employees hate to get the bad news. So what happens? A lot of times you have a performance appraisal process in organizations that are broken if they're not done right. So that's why I'm just going to cover it briefly here, based upon my experience of seeing some that work and seeing some that don't. And one thing that performance appraisals should do is they should be designed to reflect the values and the mission of the organization. That should be the overarching thing. It's kind of cliche, but each organization has a culture. It has things that it values. For example, if you're in an organization who says its number one thing is we are an ethical organization, well, guess what? Your performance appraisal should then stress ethics and honesty. That should be predominant in there. For example, at Fayetteville, we are a utility. We have people who dig ditches in the ground. We have people who work around 230,000 volts of electricity. Safety is number one. On everybody's performance appraisal at Fayetteville, including mine, safety is the first thing I'm rated on. And it's pervasive in the organization. We have worked, and I'm actually pretty proud of this, 3.7 million work hours without a lost time accident. And that's because safety is part of our culture. And I know that if somebody gets injured in my group because I didn't have the right safety rules in place, that's number one on my performance appraisal. So the company is living its values, and that is reflected in the performance appraisal. If you have an organization that says, we have high ethics, and they say, boy, I'm glad you cheated a little bit on that application for that grant, and we got it. Boy, is that reflecting the ethos of the organization? I don't think so. So it does need to be part and parcel of it. A performance appraisal can be a mix of objective and subjective measures. It's really hard sometimes to have objective measures, but you really have to try to develop some. Because then when you're taking a look at employees, it's not just your opinion. Oh, I like them because they're a North Carolina State fan, and so am I. I really like them. So-and-so's a Duke fan. I hate Duke. You don't want that kind of stuff to enter into it. It's hard to not have that happen because everybody has an opinion. But what you want to try to do is you want to try to have some very objective measures that provide pluses and minuses for an employee. For example, our call center. We have software that's installed that measures how many calls a representative takes per hour. That's one measure that we do. So what we do is we average everybody together, and you're either above or below that. Are you taking too long on the phone, too short on the phone? We're just rating you on that. So there's an objective measure. How many drop calls do you have? We have satisfaction measures where we will send out customer satisfaction surveys to customers. And if it comes back that their experience with you wasn't good, we're able to code that and take that right back down to that representative. So you have some of those objective measures in there that give that supervisor the tool. And yes, there are going to be subjective things. Things like, are they a good leader? Well, that's pretty subjective, but you ought to be able to come up with examples. And that's when you have a performance appraisal, the supervisor ought to be able to cite examples other than saying, Joe's a great leader, and rate them very high. That doesn't tell me anything. Give me some meat on that bone. Tell me some things that are very positive about that employee. You should have some standard areas in the organization that everybody gets rated on. And again, that goes back to what the vision and mission is of the organization. Things like safety, leadership, ethics, things like that should be what you rate everybody on in the organization. And then you obviously have certain specific things that are related to the job that they have. For example, my performance appraisal has 16 things that I'm rated on. 8 of them are identical for everybody else in the organization. So half of them, roughly, are things that everybody in the organization is rated on. And then there are things that are specific to my job that my boss rates me on. Here's a key thing that I think many organizations fail at, is they fail to say what the levels of performance are and that they are clearly defined. Because what happens is everybody thinks they're excellent unless you define what excellent means. If you have a rating scale that let's say is a scale of 5. Well, everybody knows what 0 is. Well, you're probably not going to be around for that much longer. But to get that top rating, what does it mean? A lot of organizations, will have it specified that as sustained performance over a prolonged period of time. So somebody does a great job on one project, they say, hey, I did a great job this year. I should get a 5. No, that's sustained performance over a period of time. I've given you a 4, which is a great rating, but you didn't earn a 5 because here's the definition of what that means. So having those gradings very clearly defined is a key both for the employee and the supervisor. If you don't have that, the whole system breaks down. And it should never be a surprise. If you get surprised when you're getting your performance appraisal, shame on your boss. Because if you're not meeting a standard, that conversation should be ongoing. That should be more of a discussion about how you can improve, the things you did positive, and where your supervisor sees you going in the future. It should not be a surprise that you walk in that door and they say, boy, this year's been terrible for you. What do you mean? I thought I was doing great. You never came to me. Well, you should know. That's not the right answer. That's poor supervision. But you wouldn't believe how many times that happens. But if you have a robust performance appraisal system, at least in some cases, you can have that conversation with that employee on an ongoing basis. It will force you to have that conversation because you're helping that employee with training, setting up training things. And some performance appraisals will say that you have to have an update at a minimum every 6 months with that employee on the appraisal. If you have goals, for example, in your performance appraisal that says next year I want you to do A, B, and C, a lot of organizations say that you should have a 6 months update on A, B, and C. Because if you sit down with that employee and say, you didn't touch A, B, and C, well, I just didn't have enough time. That doesn't matter. You're supposed to do A, B, and C. You need to have that conversation. Here's some issues with appraisals that I've seen in my time. What I like to call performance creep. What that means is scores tend to go up over time. Okay? What that means is the supervisor doesn't like to give bad news. You tend to have people who have more experience in the organization get higher ratings. Sometimes you have people who are given a lot of work and people work harder, but working harder doesn't mean that performance meets a higher standard. That just means that they were busier. Again, you have to have those very clear definitions of what the different ratings are so you don't get creep. And let me give you an example. We had a rating system at PwC and we just changed it actually last year. We had a rating system that you could rate somebody 0 to 40. There's 40 possibilities. Okay? To me, that's way too many, but yet 40 possibilities of rating somebody. I got down to the job and I looked at the past appraisals for the past 6 months, going backwards when my predecessor was there, and 95% of the appraisals had one of 4 numbers. 28, 29, 30, or 31. Because 30 was kind of the break point for you getting into that next level of raise. So people were all bunched out of 40 numbers into 4. But that had happened over time. It happened because we have a very experienced workforce and because people didn't like messing with other people's money. I actually had a supervisor tell me that one day. I sat in a meeting with my management and I said, I think we have a problem with our performance appraisals. I really don't see the difference between people. And I went to a supervisor and I said, I bet you if I asked you, you have how many people working for you? And he said 10. I said, if I asked you to get your best 3-person crew, I bet you could tell me. You got it. I could tell you exactly who I would take out there. Well, why isn't that reflected in your performance appraisals? Well, I don't want to mess with their money. You're not doing anybody any favors by doing that. But that's what happens a lot of times in organizations where you see everybody kind of get bunched. Because then everybody's on equal footing. And supervisors seem to think that if they give everybody the same rating, everybody's going to be happy because nobody's better than anybody else. If you're down here and you're getting rated up here, hey, that's pretty good for you. But if you're up here and you're getting rated down here, that's a demotivator. So again, what you want to have is you want to have objective measures, subjective measures, but you also want to have some clear definitions as to what gets you a certain rating in the organization. We got rid of that 40-point scale and now we're down to 4. Thank God. A lot of times what happens with that not messing with other people's money is that the focus has not become on actually rating the performance. It's how much money you're giving me. The focus is on the raise that's associated with the appraisal rather than the actual appraisal itself. Some organizations have actually separated out the performance appraisal raise process. I don't know if any of you have that, but a lot of places what they'll do is they will give you what they call a cost of living increase, and everybody pretty much gets that as long as you had in the previous year's acceptable performance. So you might get like a 3% cost of living increase. Then 6 months from then, you get your performance appraisal, and that might have 1 or 2% associated with it. So they kind of split the raise up into 2 pieces to take a lot of that, quote, pressure off the appraisal being clearly and almost 100% focused on the money. Because a lot of times that's all the employee wants to hear is how much money I'm getting. They don't even hear the other part of the appraisal. A lot of places also have, and we have this, where you have the employee do a self-appraisal. That involves the employee in the process as well. We have that at our organization, and it's extremely valuable. Where you send that appraisal out, have that employee rate themselves. Have them justify, again, having the clearly defined ratings. Say, if you're going to give yourself a 4, you better give me the justification for a 4. Tell me why. Tell me why you deserve that. And that's usually a very good piece because as a supervisor, I want to know where there's that gap when I sit across from that employee. Because if I agree with the employee, hey, yeah, you did a great job in that, you get a 4, I probably need to reinforce that positive behavior. But if there's a place where I rate them a 2 and they rated themselves as a 4, we better spend some time in that area because there's a gap between me and the employee on figuring out where their performance is. Supervisors do hate giving bad news, and they hate giving bad news for a number of reasons. They're afraid of losing the employee. Say, boy, if I tell them that they're not up here with everybody else, they might look for another job. Isn't that kind of counterintuitive? If they're not as good as everybody else, you're afraid of telling them that they're not as good as everybody else and that you might lose them. You need to be honest in an appraisal. If somebody is doing a great job, tell them they're doing a great job. If there are areas of improvement, tell them how they can improve next time so they have a better appraisal next time. Supervisors like to be liked. Again, you're tying it to money. And my boss just gave me a 5% raise. Isn't he a great guy? That's kind of the mentality that a lot of people have. So, again, you want to break that, and that's not doing anybody any good. And here's a key one, is the last one, that sometimes supervisors think if I give somebody a bad appraisal, that means they're going to look at me because I had a bad employee. That's not going to look good on me. If I make it look like I got all great employees, they're going to say you're a great guy. Again, you're not doing anybody any good. And if I'm a good manager and I'm taking a look at your workforce, and I'm taking a look at all these appraisals coming through, and I have my measures of your group, I'll say, you know, you rated everybody as excellent. Yep, they're all great. Well, you have the worst performing crews. How can you rate them as great? So again, you want to have that conversation, and you want to make sure that you have the system designed clearly with those expectations laid out. One other thing that you find is, if you don't have those things laid out and you don't train your supervisors, you'll have supervisors using different standards. Even if you have it kind of clearly defined, they'll interpret it differently. That's why you want to have a conversation with your supervisors. We had extensive training when we rolled out this new performance appraisal. We went from 40 to 4. We had a lot of training, a lot of examples saying, you know, for example, so-and-so did a great job on a project for you this year. Saved the company $5 million. Where would you rate them? Oh, I'd rate them a 4. No, the definition is that's sustained performance. Did they do that last year? No, just this year. Well, that's a 3. You set that expectation and you have the training around performance appraisals. It pays big dividends in the end. Of course, employees want to be rated high. And I'm not saying that someone who is busy and doing a lot of work is not valuable to the organization, but there is quantity and quality. And it's a mix of both. Because a lot of people say, I busted my butt this year and you only rated me as average. Yeah, your work product, you generated a lot of work, but your quality suffered because of that. And you didn't have a conversation with me telling me that, hey, I was putting too much on you. Again, nothing should be a surprise, but you want to kind of disjoin just being busy from the quality of the work. There are 2 aspects of it. One thing that you'll find with performance appraisals, like I said, having basically 4 ratings out of 40 is once it starts to get out of hand, it's hard to change. We had to change our whole system to kind of do a reset. If we kept that same 40 rating, you know, the same 40 numbers, and we went to our supervisors and said, you guys aren't rating them, you got to change your ratings. And you had somebody who had been given a 30, 30, 30, and now you give them a 27, they're going to say, what's up? So we had to change the whole system to do a reset. We've been very successful with it, but that just puts the warning signs going forward that we want to make sure that we don't get that same creep and the same things happening again. Performance appraisal should be a conversation about positives and areas to improve on the next appraisal. They shouldn't, I mean, sometimes appraisals do have to be punitive, but you want them to be developmental as well. If you as a supervisor are only going to say you did this well and you did this poorly and say sign the document, I gave you 2%, you're not doing your job as a manager. You want to accentuate the things that they're doing well, and you want to take the areas that are developmental needs and say, here's what you need to do to improve this. Let's work together. Maybe there's some training that I can get you to. Maybe there's something. What's going on? You know, a lot of times you'll find out things in the appraisal process that will help you understand why somebody is having difficulty. They'll say, oh my God, we just got that new computer system in, and I don't understand it at all. Okay. Then you can identify something. You can identify some training to hopefully get that employee. Because don't forget, like I said before, you have a big investment in that employee. You want that employee to be successful. So you want to have that good conversation. And the employee does need to be an active participant. That's why I am a big proponent of people doing self-appraisals, because they're part of that process. You have them take a look at their performance over the past year in a critical way. And you have them put it down on paper and justify why they think they deserve a certain rating. And what you tend to find after time, after people go through that process maybe 1 or 2 times, you pretty much get a match, because people are starting to buy into the program and starting to rate themselves pretty well. The role of HR, you want to have a place on there for the next level of management to put comments. I have direct supervisors who will rate, for example, the linemen who work out there. But I want to be able to provide some comments on those employees as well. So they know that, A, by making those comments, that I am also taking a look at what I see their performance. I'm accentuating the positives that they've done, and that I am taking an active interest as a senior manager in that organization to have some comments on the performance appraisal. It's a powerful tool, so you should have space there for upper management to make comments as well. In human resources, what they need to do, if they're doing their job, is to make sure that that consistency is occurring. If they see one supervisor, for example, starting to rate everybody higher than everybody else, they need to be the check and balance in the system to go to that supervisor and say, hey, you're rating everybody too high, or we're seeing your people rate lower, what's going on? They need to kind of be the check and balance in the system, the arbiter to make sure that the system is not getting out of hand. You can roll this right into your succession planning and your workforce planning. Again, when you do an appraisal, you're taking a look at things that the person can do going forward. That can tie right into succession planning. To say, hey, you know, you have this developmental need over here. We really think that you should go get an MSW. That's something that could probably really help you out. And gee, if you want to compete for some jobs down the road, that's where we're going as an organization. So you can tie the performance appraisal discussion, which is taking a look backwards, with the discussion looking forward to what the possibilities are, and turn that into a career development type of discussion as well. And you should have an agreed to development plan that both you and the employees sign off on, because if I say you must, that's not the way to go. You want to get buy-in from the employee on whatever that development plan is, so they know what the clear expectations are. They're part of that process. They give you feedback, and then you hopefully have a lot happier employee who's tied into the process and who wants to improve for the next year, rather than having someone who comes out of a performance appraisal demotivated. So a lot of times I've had some poor appraisals. My first performance appraisal with General Electric was like this. Here's your performance appraisal. Take it back to your desk, sign it, and put it back on my desk. Worst performance appraisal I ever had. That's not what a performance appraisal needs to be. So, any questions on this? I saw you laughing back there about them. Do you have one of them bosses that doesn't do a good performance appraisal?